There are places in the world built with a single purpose: to make a person stop being a person. Not to kill them right away, but something slower. To strip away their name, their past, their voice, their sense of meaning. To reduce them to a number sewn onto their clothes, to a body that obeys or disappears. That was Auschwitz, a system designed to make human dignity feel impossible, unsustainable, absurd. And yet, in the summer of 1941, in that same place, a man stepped forward. Not out of impulse or desperation. He stepped forward because his entire life had been moving toward that moment, even before he knew it. Maximilian Kolbe was born in 1894 in Zdunska Wola, in a Poland that did not exist on any map at the time. Its territory had been divided among the Russian, Prussian, and Austro-Hungarian empires. Growing up in that world meant growing up with an identity that official power refused to recognize. His family was modest, hardworking, and deeply Catholic. From a young age, he showed an energy that was hard to contain, an active character that did not fit easily into stillness. Tradition holds that as a boy, he had a vision of the Virgin Mary that shaped the direction of his inner life. But beyond that pious detail, what can be seen clearly is that, from very early on, he sensed his path ran through faith and through something larger than himself. He entered the order of Friars Minor Conventual, the Franciscans. He went to study in Rome, where he trained in philosophy and theology and was ordained a priest. But what set him apart from many of his contemporaries was not devotion alone. It was practical intelligence. Kolbe watched the world changing around him, and instead of resisting those changes, he thought about how to use them. The press, Catholic publications, printed media reaching more and more households every year. All of it could be a channel for faith. Not a decorative channel, but a real, effective, modern one. In 1917, still a student in Rome, he founded the Militia of the Immaculata. It was a Marian apostolate association with a clear mission: to spread devotion to Mary as a path toward conversion and holiness. Kolbe's devotion to the Virgin was not a vague sentiment or a cultural habit without depth. It was the organizing center of his spiritual life. For him, the Immaculata was not a distant figure, but an active presence, a force that moved both his prayer and his work. That conviction grew over the years and translated into concrete projects, into decisions that took visible form. Back in Poland, Kolbe did not settle into contemplation. He founded a Catholic magazine called The Night of the Immaculata and turned it into a serious publishing project. The publication grew quickly and reached a remarkable circulation for its time. He handled not only the spiritual content, but also the logistics, distribution, and administration. He understood that a good idea needed structure to survive. Inspiration alone was not enough. It needed organization. That same spirit gave rise to something even larger: Niepokalanów. In Polish, the name means City of the Immaculata. That was not a metaphor. It was a real Franciscan community, built in the 1930s on donated land near Warsaw, that eventually housed hundreds of friars and functioned as a center for mission, religious life, and communication. They had their own printing press, produced publications in multiple languages, and operated a radio station. It was an evangelization project conceived with the scale and mindset of a modern operation. Kolbe understood that faith could not stay locked inside church walls while the world transformed outside them, and that same drive took him even further. In 1930, he traveled to Japan as a missionary. Nagasaki, a city with a history of Christian persecution stretching back centuries, was where he founded a new community, another City of the Immaculata. He did it without speaking Japanese, without sufficient resources. in a country that was culturally distant from everything he had known. The community he built there survived even the atomic bomb in 1945 because Kolbe had chosen to construct it on a hillside that was partially shielded by the city's geography. That happened 4 years after his death, but the detail carries weight. Even his practical decisions seemed to follow a logic that reached beyond the immediate moment. He returned to Poland before the Second World War broke out. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland and everything changed. Niepokalanów was occupied, and many friars were temporarily arrested. Kolbe returned to the community and for a time continued his work, helping Jews and displaced people who came seeking refuge. But the persecution did not stop. In February 1941, he was arrested by the Gestapo. The charges were vague, as they usually were, activities hostile to the regime. He was transferred first to a prison in Warsaw, and then, in May of that year, to Auschwitz. What awaited him there does not require detailed description to be understood in its full dimension. The camp operated as a mechanism of systematic degradation, forced labor, starvation, arbitrary violence, numbers tattooed or sewn onto clothing in place of names. Everything was designed so that the person who arrived would stop perceiving themselves as one. Kolbe was 47 years old when he entered Auschwitz. He had been ill with tuberculosis for years. His physical condition was not that of someone who could easily withstand what the camp demanded. In July 1941, a prisoner escaped from the block where Kolbe was held. The camp's rules were brutal. If someone escaped, 10 men from the same block would be condemned to starve to death in a bunker. The reprisal was collective, deliberate, designed to make prisoners surveil one another. The commandant chose 10 men. One of those selected, Franciszek Gajowniczek, began to cry. He had a wife. He had children. At that moment, Kolbe stepped out of the line. He approached the commandant and asked to take that man's place. He explained that he was a priest, that he was older, that no family was waiting for him. The commandant agreed. Gajowniczek returned to the line. Kolbe entered the bunker with the other 9 condemned men. According to the testimony of those who were nearby, he outlasted all of them. After 2 weeks, the guards ended his life with a lethal injection. It was August 14th, 1941. Gajowniczek survived the war. He lived until 1995. For decades he spoke about Kolbe, not as a debt he owed, but as something he could never quite fully explain. Someone had chosen to die in his place, and that decision had changed the entire course of his life. In 1982, Pope John Paul II, himself Polish, canonized Maximilian Kolbe. He declared him a martyr of charity. The word martyr can sound solemn and remote, but in this case, it carries a precision worth holding on to. Kolbe did not die because he was killed directly for his faith. He died because he chose to die in place of another person. It was an act of charity in the most literal and most extreme sense, giving his own life so that someone else could go on living. There was no guarantee of anything. There was no camera, no audience, just a man in a line who took one step forward. What that gesture reveals, though, cannot be understood without the rest of his life. It was not a sudden impulse from someone who found courage at the last moment. Kolbe had spent decades learning to place his time, his energy, and his intelligence in service of something greater than himself. He had organized communities, founded publications, crossed oceans to evangelize, lived under the Franciscan rule, and built one project after another with the conviction that faith cannot afford to stand still. By the time he arrived at Auschwitz, he already knew, in a way that went beyond reason alone, that his life did not belong only to him. His story remains relevant today, and not simply as an example of extreme heroism. Kolbe was someone who understood his moment in history, who used the available media with creativity and purpose, who built community with vision and discipline, who traveled to an unfamiliar country out of conviction, and who, in the end, showed that even in a place built to destroy humanity, a free choice is still possible. Auschwitz could take his name, his clothes, his weight, his health. It could not take his capacity to love. That is what Kolbe preserved until the very end. And that is what no system, no matter how violent, can fully confiscate from a life that has been ordered from the inside out.